The new G.I. Joe O-ring figures have arrived, and I love them. But I don't think they love me. I'll explain why on this episode of Geek Dad Life. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geek Dad Life. It's your host, Jay Gladfelter here. As a kid who grew up in the 80s and 90s, the O-ring G.I. Joe figures were some of my favorite toys growing up. While I was never a huge fan of the cartoon, I definitely had plenty of the action figures and vehicles and play sets. My thoughts then, and they're the same now, is that those O-ring figures with all of their articulation and display ability and playability were kind of unmatched for really any other toy line of that era. Even with all of the advancements in modern articulation, none have matched the fun and playability factor of those 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joe A Real American Heroes figures had back in the 80s and 90s. Fast forward to today when so many of those toy lines that we grew up with have been brought back to toy shelves, in part to feed on that nostalgia for those great toys of our past, but also to introduce it to kids today. Hasbro has had kind of varied approaches, some really good like the Kenner Classics Real Ghostbusters toys, as well as those Transformers re-releases, to kind of a weird choice to re-release those 25th anniversary G.I. Joes on retro cards. That's why I was so excited when at this past year's PulseCon, Hasbro announced that O-rings were going to return with this Hasbro Pulse exclusive 2-pack featuring Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, as well as G.I. Joe's first HasLab project, a reimagined Sky Striker, along with a bunch of new O-ring figures. We've got to wait till next year to really experience that Sky Striker, and I back that HasLab Sky Striker, so be sure to hit the subscribe button and that bell icon to not miss out on my thoughts on that. However, this Hasbro Pulse 2-pack is arriving on our doorsteps now. The unique packaging for this 2-pack showcases Hasbro's unique approach to the reintroduction of the O-rings. Instead of giving us individual figures on retail shelves, they are giving us these figures in an upscaled package featuring these two iconic G.I. Joe characters. It is supposed to evoke the look of those classic vinyl carrying cases that we had as kids. It has original artwork featuring Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. I will note here though, this features the version 2 look for Snake Eyes, honestly probably the most popular look for this very popular character, but the figure we're getting is actually the V1 or V1.5 version of Snake Eyes. The artwork is nice, but it does highlight the problem this pack faces, where, I think we all would have preferred the V2 version of Snake Eyes. Listen, don't get me wrong. I love that original Snake Eyes look. I have the vintage figure, but really, I think if we wanted Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow battling against each other, we would probably opt for that version 2 look of the character. Inside the box, you have 2 unpunched retro-style card backs and bubbles. I really don't have any gripes with the front of these card backs. The artwork looks great. It really pops in it. It feels like the vintage G.I. Joe figures. But when you turn over to the back, you have one of the most disappointing parts of these toys. One of the most iconic parts of those vintage Real American Hero G.I. Joe figures was the file card. I understand why a lot of modern toys have a lot of multi-language card backs, so that way these global toy companies can release the same figure all over the place. But with these Hasbro exclusive figures, the multi-language approach basically takes away all of the cool information we would get on the original file cards. Super 7 with their G.I. Joe reaction line that is on retail shelves, not even an online exclusive, gives us a much fuller file card with a more fleshed out backstory. Hopefully this is something they can fix in future releases, but until then, it's a bit of a bummer how these card backs turned out. The figures themselves, though, I have no complaints. I really like their approach to these characters. They look a lot like their vintage counterparts. They do have a bit more of a matte feel to them and a matte plastic, which I actually kind of feels a little bit stronger than the plastics on the vintage figures. Now, again, I'm comparing it to one that's 40 years old versus one that is brand new, so that could be a factor here. But the thing is, a lot of those vintage G.I. Joes, the plastic has gotten very brittle with age, so it's great to get pretty darn good recreations of those vintage figures, but with modern plastic that will hopefully stand the test of time better than some of these vintage figures have. And I gotta say, having these in hand and kind of posing them and setting them up for these shots, It's so awesome to have the O-Ring Joes back. There's just a magic there that just adds to the playability. It's just something that no other 3 3/4 inch figure does. And, you know, even the modern ones, it really is something special. It's the reason my kids, you know, I have a bin of old G.I. Joes that they play with. There's just something about the O-Ring that makes a better toy. And that is what makes the approach Hasbro is taking with their reintroduction of O-Rings so frustrating. Now, I know it's early on in the line, and I totally get having like the first set of figures be a Hasbro Pulse exclusive to kind of launch the line, along with that HasLab Sky Striker. But I would hope there would be some type of retail presence that puts a lot of figures on shelves. But at a recent Fan First streaming event celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Real American Hero figures, they didn't have any announcements to make on O-Rings as far as like a big retail release. The only thing we did get was another Hasbro Pulse exclusive 2-pack of the Cobra Officer and Cobra Trooper. Again, I don't necessarily dislike the 2-packs, but they're expensive. This one actually is more expensive than the Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes 2-pack. It's $41.99 versus, was it $39.99 for the other one. That's more expensive than the Super 7 reaction figures that are on shelves right now. And we're not even getting these figures until August of this year at the earliest. This 2-pack, along with a Baroness pack-in with a Transformers crossover figure, is all that's been announced. Now, I understand that O-Ring manufacturing for the figures is a little bit more work than, say, any other type of toy that Hasbro might produce. It actually has to have some hands-on assembly to make these figures. So I'm not going to complain saying, why can't you do this? Or why can't it be exactly like all of your other toy lines? That being said, it's just a little bit disappointing when I really like these figures, and I think my kids would really like these figures. Maybe I'm just spoiled by Mattel's Masters of the Universe Origins toy line, which has given us so many characters, so many figures in a short span of time, and they're just that great toy line that, you know, has the nostalgia for the grown-ups, but also are great toys still that collectors can collect and kids can play with. So in the top of this video, when I said I love these figures, but I don't think they love me, I'm talking about the fact that I am somebody that is a fan of this release, and I want Hasbro to give me more of them because I think it's a really good toy line. But we're not getting a lot of releases. They're Hasbro Pulse exclusives. Any of the ones that I'm trying to get are really expensive compared to other 3 3/4 inch figures. It's even more expensive than Super 7's reaction figures, which I've always felt are a little bit overpriced. But, you know, those are on retail shelves. Those are the things taking up the place of where these O-Ring G.I. Joes should be in the G.I. Joe section of toy shelves. Because people are buying these Super 7 reaction G.I. Joe figures, and while I think the cards are great, the art is great, the back of the cards are great, and I think the figures are really nice, but when you have them side by side, like say this Super 7 Storm Shadow alongside this new re-release, this new O-Ring Storm Shadow, to me there's no comparison. I think the O-Ring runs circles around the Super 7 Storm Shadow. So Hasbro, if you're listening, you have brought back G.I. Joe O-Rings, which is great. The next step is to have faith that this could be a really good toy line on toy shelves, not just for collectors, but for kids as well. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, and definitely check out some of my other videos like this one that YouTube wants you to check out, and one of my more recent videos. And until next time, hasta luego, and goodbye.